So my daughter gave me a few tips about my last video and said, hey, you can't put the camera up your nose. And so I decided to give you a little bit prettier backdrop. I know this isn't studio quality and the sound isn't exactly what I'd like it to be yet, but we're making headway and God says don't despise small beginnings, so here we go. I want to revisit a little bit more on the Chief's word. God won't let me get rid of that completely, and since it is a word for the year, I want to go ahead and make sure that it's always in the forefront of my mind when I'm thinking about things, because it's what he said and I need to learn how I can take that information and apply it to my life. So when I was watching the game and the 24 hours preceding it, there was a lot of tension. It wasn't that I thought that the word was wrong, but once you put it out there, there's a little bit of hesitancy or maybe even slight trepidation. You're like, man, I hope I heard God correctly because I put this out there for the world to see. But it's not stress, it's tension. And that tension, that time under tension, is actually what grows spiritual muscle. Just like in the physical realm, when you talk about time under tension, you say, well, I'm going to put that muscle and I'm going to fatigue it for a longer period of time. And eventually, as that muscle has to deal with that resistance, then it goes further and it starts to build and says, I'm going to be ready for this next time. And so that was what was going on during those 24 hours before the Chiefs Super Bowl game. One of the things that God told me is he said, go put your money where your mouth is. And I don't think I'd ever heard God say that before. And I was trying to figure out what that meant. And so eventually I came to the point where I said, you know what, I think he's actually asking me to bet on the game. So I'd never bet on a game before. I'd never gone online and done any of that gambling stuff. And most Christians are a little bit offended by that kind of thing, or at least there are a lot that might be. But I was like, you know what, if God's telling me to do this, I'm going to do it. He's told people weirder things. He told a prophet to marry a prostitute, and he told one to lay on his side naked, and lots of other things. So I just didn't really care what other people thought. I wanted to do what God said. So I went out and I bet $1,000 on the Chiefs game. And as I was watching the game, I didn't even think about the bet. It got to about 6 minutes left in the game, and I said, oh yeah, I have $1,000 riding on this game, because I was more concerned about people hearing God's word and getting it correct than I was about my, I guess most people would say, selfish desires. So anyways, as I was watching the game, we were down 20-10, and then at some point between that and the 31-20 victory, I figured out, hey, I'm betting 1,000 on this, and I started to get a little bit more excited, even though I was already on the edge of my seat waiting for God to fulfill the word in the way that he did. I felt compelled to tell you that story because I think sometimes we aren't willing to put our money where our mouth is. James says that faith without works is dead. And in this case, the bet was my works. It was actually the evidence of my faith. And I think that's what God is saying, is like, attach some risk and attach some value. And it makes the word stronger and actually builds your faith over time. I want to revisit a little bit about how the Chiefs were playing in that game. I think it's a representation of how the church is supposed to be, how we're supposed to act. We're supposed to be in unity. We're supposed to perform miracles. We should never count ourselves out. You could hear on the sideline all the things that the Chiefs were saying. They were just saying, you know what, it's going to be special. Mahomes was yelling this on the sideline. They're going to talk about this forever, is what he said. I heard several times earlier in the video that I posted before, this is our season. And we need to think like that. We just have to be relentless in our faith and never stop believing, just like the Chiefs showed. Another thing that I saw as I was researching some of the articles after I saw the Super Bowl win is one that talked about the Miracle Run highlights. And the Miracle Run was in the Tennessee Titans game, the AFC Championship. And one of the announcers actually said, what a run out of this world. And I believe this was another prophetic thing. God is saying, you know what, we got to reach into the kingdom of heaven and pull it down to earth. We got to go for things that are not of this world, but of the things that are unseen, not seen. And I also saw that Sean Boltz prophesied about the winds of change and things that are coming, which was also in that word. I saw a screenshot of Frank Clark's quote about Derrick Henry, how he was an easy person to tackle. And I actually looked up on the top left corner, and the website itself was The Comeback. So God is just confirming this word all over the place. I think I mentioned in my last video that Damian Williams ran for 104 yards, and he got 29 passing yards. for a total of 133 total yards. And why he wasn't the MVP is probably just because he's not a big name, but he definitely deserved that. And even though that wasn't part of the big picture of the word, it was a little detail that I feel like God was confirming that, hey, you know what, this part, even though it seemed insignificant, was actually a confirmation of what I was saying. Another thing that I saw was that the 49ers, and this was pointed out to me either on a website or by my brother actually showing me a meme, and he talked about the 49ers being 7 times 7, which is actually the 7 times 7, the year of Jubilee. You have the 7 cycles of 7 years. And, I hesitate to do this a little bit, but I feel like if I'm going to be transparent and let you know what God is doing in my life, it'll help you. And that's the point. I tell my young adults all the time things that are going on because they need to see an example or something practical in front of them. They can say, you know what, I've seen him, I trust him, so I can follow what he's saying based on the fruit of his life. So back in 2016, my taxable income for the entire year was under $6,000. Now keep in mind we have a family of 4. I absolutely don't know how that's possible. It's a long story. You can read about it in my book someday, but just know that we were in dire straits, and God actually opened up a way for us to stay in a place for free for 7.5 months. So I've been on the other side where, I'm broker than broke, and I can't rub 2 pennies together. But I'm also on the other side, and this year is a year of Jubilee, and on the 22nd of February this year, I will be completely personally and corporately in my business debt-free. God has taken me from a place where I made basically nothing, and in less than 4 years, we have gotten completely out of debt, paying off well over $250,000 in debt. This is not a testimony about what I've done or how amazing I am. This is completely God. I was nowhere to be found on the scale of financial things, and God has turned our life around and brought amazing, wonderful things into it. The last thing I want to point out about this research that I've done is I saw a meme that said that the Super Bowl was on the 33rd day of the year with 333 days remaining. And if you remember in the prophetic word, there was Jeremiah 33:3, call unto me and I will answer you. And then the last thing is that we saw the Sports Illustrated cover where it said Kingdom Comeback. And I was sitting at the table with Andrew about 5 or 6 minutes left in the game, and I said, you know what KC stands for? It stands for Kingdom Comeback. And here we are, the next day, it's on the front of Sports Illustrated magazine. So I think it's a good word to go back to, revisit throughout the entire year. It's not something to put on the shelf. I know the Super Bowl's over and all the excitement is starting to drop, but I also believe that there's so much in there this year. When you come up against giants, when you feel like there's no hope, when you start thinking about dreams that haven't come to pass yet, I would encourage you to go back and look at this word, pull it out and say, look at the dozen or so confirmations that God has given to us to verify and prove that this was him speaking. And be really encouraged, because this is going to be a good year for those of you that are aligned with God.